Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you have had a good start to your week. We're recording a little later this week than we would usually do this postscript session because our week's been full here at First St. Andrews too. We have said goodbye to a couple of our members this week, saints in our community. So we've gone through that process. We have also continued to make preparations for what we all know is a busy season of anticipation, and have also begun to even vision and think creatively about what our new year will look like here at First St. Andrews. So be aware. We will continue to grow and imagine and welcome whomever, wherever, whenever you or anybody else wants to become involved in some of the exciting things that we're doing. As it concerns this last Sunday's worship service, I received some commentary from some of you, and I really appreciate that. Namely, that you had not heard that particular section of our lectionary passage emphasized, the one that names Elizabeth as going into hiding. I had not paid much attention to that either. I probably just glanced at it and figured she was taking care of herself, but did not focus my attention there. But this week, as a result of Dr. Will DeGaffney's commentary, I paid closer attention and I got to thinking, why do women the world over have to hide sometimes, especially in a potentially precarious condition like pregnancy? Why are they forced into hiding? Why do they have to seek shelter? There are lots of reasons. And when I look at the first century, the temporal, spatial, cultural context in which Elizabeth lived, I came up with a lot of reasons. One of them that I named on Sunday, as you might recall, had to do with the community. Some of the suspicions that would have arisen for somebody that was well advanced in age, perhaps beyond what anybody would have thought was possible in terms of childbearing. And when you get community suspicion and people begin gossiping and talking, especially in that world where your relationship to your community and your village is everything, it can mean a certain quality of life either increases or decreases substantially if the wrong things get said and people begin to believe them. So I can imagine that she was reluctant to say too much too quickly for fear of some kind of tangential reprisal that would have affected her family's well-being and the well-being of the child that she was nurturing and growing inside of her. I also thought about the larger context of Roman occupation, how difficult it must have been for the Jewish people to live under that kind of intense scrutiny and surveillance, how anything from births to other practices and natural processes in their life would have been monitored and scrutinized by Roman authorities, much like the Passover event that we've heard a lot about in relation to Pontius Pilate coming into Jerusalem just prior to the Passion of Christ. So we know that living under that kind of intense occupation, a forced urbanization and management of population, that would have affected Elizabeth, and it certainly would have affected her child, John, who was growing inside of her. There's also this sense of God's promise that Elizabeth carries with her. It is not simply John, it is not simply Elizabeth or Zechariah, their immediate family, but it is her people. It is a promise that brings hope and preparation for a whole new way of life, a new way of being. And not even just for her people, but for all people. There is a significance to her state, her situation, and the promise that she carried that I don't think can be overestimated. I think we would do well to go back to this passage and also look at Mary as well. We didn't talk about her this last Sunday, but if we look at Mary and her forced seclusion, remember when she conceives, she goes and stays with Elizabeth, right, for 3 months. And so here you have Elizabeth and Mary holding each other, caring for each other in seclusion, in hiding, for fear of reprisal, for fear of Roman surveillance and scrutiny, and perhaps for countless other things that I don't fully know or understand living in 2023. This last Sunday, I used a concrete reference to events in El Salvador in 1980. But many of you could probably reference other events that had happened before that or have happened subsequent to that. Esperanza Ortega was the name of the woman that I mentioned on Sunday. And Esperanza spoke of her faith as la fe vivida, a faith that is lived, and it is what allowed her to care for her children while running from authorities that were threatening her village, that very often throughout the countryside of El Salvador raised entire towns looking for anybody that would dare resist the brutal dictatorship that had taken power in El Salvador at that time. She was a part of a large flight of people from their villages that was entitled the Flight of May, or El Guinda de Mayo. So when I think about the plight of Esperanza and Elizabeth and Mary, and you can insert somebody that you know, or maybe you yourself, maybe if you had been in that situation, maybe you've experienced what it was like to not necessarily want to come forward. Somebody shared with me that whenever they had brought a child into this world, they had gone through quite a bit prior to that, right? They had experienced a measure of trauma prior to bearing their child. And as a result, they were really afraid to share too far and wide the news that they were so happy about, because they were concerned about what could happen based on their past experience. And so thinking about our lectionary passage, thinking about our role as a community of faith, my question for you, something to sit with for the remainder of this week leading into Sunday, where we will continue to talk about mothering and caring and nurturing as we await the birth of the Christ child this year. What can we do? How can we be a refuge for people that have had to go into hiding? People that are unable to share with too many people what's happening in their life. It doesn't have to be pregnancy, it can be something else. But how can we as a community of faith that seeks to be affirming, welcoming, extravagantly hospitable, how can we be that refuge for them? How can we provide a space that is open to their needs and does not demand or expect or require things of them that would put them into an unsafe position or make them feel unwelcomed in any way? That will continue to be this growing edge for us as a community, because we celebrate diversity, we welcome it, we want it. But when it's here, people with needs, and we all have needs, how are we going to live faithfully into this new reality of being church, where we're no longer under the illusion that we don't have these needs? They're here, they're with us, and they're in our community. How are you and I going to work to create a space that can provide refuge for Elizabeth and Mary and Esperanza and everyone else with need? Thanks for joining me again, and I hope these questions have stimulated your thought and opened your heart a little bit. Would be happy to receive any questions or thoughts as well related to this, and I will see you next Sunday.